Ethan had always considered himself a man of reason. Nothing about his life suggested a need for mystery or suspense. Yet that evening, everything changed with the arrival of a simple package. He came home after an exhausting day at work, the kind where every decision felt heavy and every conversation seemed to drag. The moment he opened his front door, he noticed something unusual on the kitchen counter, a small jar unlike anything he had seen before. It was delicately crafted, with intricate carvings running along the surface, almost like ancient symbols. The glass shimmered faintly under the kitchen light, reflecting colors that didn't seem entirely natural. Beside the jar lay a note, handwritten in Clara's familiar yet elegant script. "Do exactly as I say, trust me." The note was brief, cryptic, and almost unnerving. Ethan held it in his hand, feeling a mix of curiosity and caution. Clara had always been creative and occasionally playful, but this was different. There was no explanation, no context, just a strange object and an imperative message. He called Clara from the kitchen. "Hey, what is this?" he asked, trying to keep his tone casual. Clara's response was calm, almost eerily so. "Open it when I'm out. But don't do anything else until you see me." That single sentence sent a shiver down his spine. It wasn't the playful tone he was used to. There was something heavier in her voice, an unspoken weight that made Ethan hesitate. Unable to resist entirely, he approached the jar. It felt heavier than it looked, and as soon as he touched the glass, a faint warmth spread through his fingers. Ethan squinted at the strange symbols etched into the surface, wondering if they had some meaning. Were they artistic flourishes, or something more? He ran his finger along the carvings, trying to decipher any pattern, but nothing obvious emerged. The jar seemed to pulse lightly under his touch, as if alive in some inexplicable way. Ethan's mind raced with possibilities. Was this some kind of elaborate joke? A gift? An experiment? Nothing in his past hinted at something so unusual. Yet, despite the anxiety curling in his chest, he felt an undeniable pull toward the jar. It demanded attention, almost as if it were whispering to him in some language he could not understand. As he sat there staring at it, Clara returned home, carrying a small bag of groceries. She moved with a calm confidence, seemingly unaffected by Ethan's obvious tension. She placed the bag down without a word and simply watched him, eyes quiet and observant. Ethan felt a mix of frustration and curiosity. He wanted answers, yet he knew Clara wouldn't give them freely. That night, as Ethan continued to examine the jar, he realized this was no ordinary object. There was an unspoken promise, a sense that something extraordinary or perhaps dangerous was about to unfold. He didn't yet know whether he was ready, but the first thread of a mystery had been planted. And as he glanced at Clara, he knew that following her instructions would be unavoidable, no matter how strange or unsettling they might become. The following morning, Ethan awoke with the jar's presence lingering in his mind like a persistent question he couldn't ignore. Despite his fatigue from the previous day, curiosity gnawed at him. Clara, however, remained quiet and composed, her calm demeanor only intensifying his sense of unease. Finally, she handed him a small piece of paper, folded neatly, its edges worn as if it had been written some time ago. Ethan unfolded the note carefully, revealing the first set of instructions. It was simple yet unnerving. Whisper a secret into the jar. Speak only the truth and nothing else. Do not question, do not hesitate. The words seemed to echo in the quiet kitchen, leaving him momentarily speechless. Ethan had always been straightforward with Clara. Their marriage was built on honesty, yet the thought of voicing a deeply personal secret, something even he rarely confronted, made his heart race. He hesitated, holding the jar in his hands. Its faint glow seemed to intensify as if sensing his indecision. The carvings on the glass shimmered in the morning light, and Ethan felt an odd, magnetic pull toward the object. He wondered what Clara had planned. Was this some playful psychological experiment? Or something more profound, something he wasn't prepared for? After several moments of silence, Ethan finally leaned closer to the jar, taking a deep breath. His mind wandered through the years, landing on a memory he had buried, a moment of failure, a personal regret he had rarely admitted, even to himself. With a trembling voice, he whispered the secret into the jar. As the words left his lips, he felt an unusual warmth spread from his hands into his chest. As if the jar was absorbing more than just sound, it was absorbing the weight of his emotions. Immediately, a soft hum filled the room. Ethan stepped back, startled. The jar's glow pulsed gently, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Clara observed silently, her expression unreadable, giving nothing away. Ethan's heart raced with a mixture of awe and fear. He realized that this was not a simple exercise in confession. There was a strange, almost supernatural energy in the jar, a presence that seemed aware of his emotions, almost sentient in its response. Clara finally spoke. Her voice calm but firm. Each step you take with the jar will reveal a part of the truth about yourself, about me, about us. But you must follow each instruction without hesitation. Ethan nodded, though the words only deepened the tension in his chest. The idea of confronting hidden truths was thrilling and terrifying at the same time. As he set the jar back on the counter, Ethan felt a shift in the air, subtle but undeniable. The ordinary kitchen, with its mundane appliances and familiar smells, suddenly seemed charged with a quiet anticipation. He realized that the jar was more than a container. It was a key to something hidden, something he had never imagined. And though he didn't yet understand the full extent of what Clara had planned, he knew that once the process began, there would be no turning back. The first step was complete, yet it had only raised more questions. Ethan stared at the jar, his mind racing, wondering what the next instruction might demand, and whether he would be ready to face it. After completing the first step with the jar, Ethan felt a mixture of curiosity and unease. The experience had already shaken him, revealing a depth of vulnerability he had rarely confronted. Yet Clara's next instruction promised to take him even further into the unknown. She handed him another carefully folded slip of paper, her expression calm yet resolute. The note instructed him to pour water into the jar and place it under the moonlight. At first, the task seemed simple, almost ceremonial. But as Ethan held the jar and considered the instruction, a sense of foreboding crept over him. There was something almost ritualistic about Clara's tone and the deliberate nature of the steps. He hesitated, questioning whether he was ready to proceed, but the unspoken trust between them pushed him forward. Carefully, he filled the jar with water, watching as the liquid shimmered inside the glass. That night, under the pale glow of the moon, Ethan placed the jar on the windowsill, its carvings catching the light and casting dancing patterns across the walls. The water inside the jar began to ripple even though there was no wind, no movement other than his own cautious breathing. Ethan's heart pounded as he realized the jar was responding to him, as if it were alive, attentive to every gesture, every thought. Suddenly, images began to appear on the surface of the water. At first, they were fleeting, a flash of a childhood memory, the echo of a forgotten dream. Then the visions became more vivid, almost tangible. Ethan saw moments from his past he had long ignored or suppressed, failures he had never admitted, regrets he had tried to bury, and decisions that had shaped the man he was. Some of these memories were pleasant, but many were unsettling, reminding him of his fears and insecurities. Ethan was both terrified and fascinated. The jar seemed to absorb his past and reflect it back in a way that demanded acknowledgement. Each image was accompanied by an almost imperceptible vibration, as if the jar were urging him to confront the emotions tied to these memories rather than merely observe them. He realized that this was not a passive experience. It was interactive, demanding honesty and courage. Clara watched silently from a distance, her presence reassuring but also enigmatic. She offered no commentary, no guidance beyond her earlier words. It will show what you cannot see yourself, and it will test you. Ethan understood now that the jar's power was not limited to memories. It revealed truths hidden deep within the psyche, truths he had never dared confront. By the time the night ended, Ethan was drained, his mind racing with revelations. The jar had not only shown him his past but had begun to illuminate patterns in his behavior, subtle fears and insecurities that influenced his decisions even in the present. It was a mirror in the most profound sense, reflecting not just appearances but the essence of his inner self. As he returned the jar to its place on the counter, Ethan felt both fear and anticipation for the next step. The jar was no longer just a mysterious object. It was a guide, a catalyst, and a challenge. He understood that whatever Clara had planned next would demand even greater honesty and courage, and that his life and his understanding of himself might be changed forever. Ethan had begun to sense that the jar was no ordinary object, but nothing could have prepared him for what Clara asked next. She handed him another slip of paper, her calm gaze meeting his with an intensity that made him pause. The instruction was deceptively simple. Write down a question you've been too afraid to ask yourself. Fold it and place it inside the jar. Ethan's hands trembled as he picked up a pen. He had spent years avoiding certain truths, bearing fears so deep that even Clara might never have known them. What if the jar exposed something he wasn't ready to face? What if the revelation destroyed the fragile sense of security he clung to? Despite the apprehension gnawing at him, he knew he could not refuse. The tension in the room was suffocating, as though the air itself anticipated the moment of truth. He wrote the words carefully, almost ritualistically, asking himself a question that had haunted him for years. Am I truly capable of protecting those I love? Or am I destined to fail them when it matters most? As he folded the paper and placed it inside the jar, a subtle vibration ran through the glass. The faint glow intensified, shifting from a soft luminescence to a blinding, almost ethereal light that filled the kitchen. Ethan instinctively stepped back, shielding his eyes. As the jar released a vapor that swirled and thickened in the air. To his astonishment, the vapor began to coalesce, taking on the shape of a figure, a distorted, shadowy version of himself. It mirrored his every movement, yet there was something otherworldly about it, something terrifyingly honest. The figure's eyes were unflinching, staring directly into Ethan's soul, reflecting every insecurity, every doubt, and every moment of weakness he had ever tried to hide. The experience was overwhelming. It was as if the jar had the power to externalize the deepest, most vulnerable parts of his psyche. Clara's voice broke the heavy silence, steady but filled with an unspoken gravity. The jar doesn't lie. It reveals what you cannot see yourself. You must confront it if you wish to understand the truth. Ethan felt a wave of panic and awe. He realized that the jar had the ability not only to reveal hidden memories, but also to confront him with truths he had never dared face about himself, his fears, and his relationships. The shadow figure moved closer, and in its gaze, Ethan saw the accumulation of every moment he had doubted his own strength. Every time he had feared failing those he loved. As the vision dissipated, Ethan was left trembling, the paper still in his hand, the jar glowing softly as if sated for the moment. He now understood that this was more than a simple object. It was a mirror to the soul, a vessel capable of revealing the unspoken and unseen. He looked at Clara, seeing her in a new light, not just as his wife, but as someone entrusted with guiding him through this extraordinary process, someone who had endured her own hidden struggles to be here, quietly waiting for him to face the truth. By the end of the night, Ethan felt both exhausted and enlightened. The first true revelation had shaken him, leaving a profound impact on his perception of himself. He realized that the jar would continue to challenge him, demanding courage, honesty, and an openness he had never experienced before. And yet, amid the fear and uncertainty, a strange sense of trust and anticipation took root. He now understood that the most profound truths often came at the cost of facing the deepest fears. By now, Ethan had come to understand that the jar was far more than a simple object. It was a vessel capable of revealing hidden truths, memories and emotions he had never fully confronted. Yet even with all he had experienced, nothing could have prepared him for the revelation that Clara was about to share. One evening, after the latest exercise with the jar, she finally spoke openly, her voice steady but filled with weight and sincerity. "The jar is not mine alone," she began. Ethan listened intently as Clara explained the origins of the mysterious object. It had been passed down through generations in her family, each owner sworn to secrecy. It was a tool, a gift, or perhaps a responsibility that could reveal the deepest truths about anyone who interacted with it. Her words carried a strange gravity, confirming the intensity of the experiences Ethan had just endured. "It reveals the parts of ourselves we cannot see," she continued, "and the parts of others that are hidden from view. But it can also challenge us in ways we are not always ready for." Ethan was stunned. The jar's strange glow, its ability to manifest images and even figures from one's mind, suddenly made sense in a terrifyingly logical way. It wasn't just a jar. It was a mirror of the soul, an instrument capable of uncovering realities most people spend a lifetime avoiding. Yet the most shocking revelation came next. Clara told him that the jar did not only reflect the self, it also reflected the secrets, fears, and vulnerabilities of those we love. Ethan realized, with a mix of awe and anxiety, that the shadowy figure he had seen during the previous exercise was not merely his own subconscious. It had been partially influenced by Clara's experiences, her own hidden fears subtly woven into the jar's manifestations. She had been shielding him from some of the harsher truths of her past, waiting until he was ready to confront them. For years she had carried her own burdens silently, ensuring that their shared life remained grounded in stability and trust. The room felt charged with an intensity Ethan had never experienced before. He stared at Clara, no longer just his wife but also a guardian of secrets, a guide through an almost mystical process of self-discovery. He realized the jar was not a threat but an opportunity, a way to face fears, heal old wounds, and understand each other on a profound level. Clara continued, emphasizing that the jar's revelations were not meant to punish or frighten, but to illuminate truth. She explained that many in her family had used it to uncover hidden traumas, reconcile with difficult emotions, and strengthen bonds with loved ones. The process required courage, honesty, and an openness to vulnerability, and those who misused or feared the jar often regretted it. Ethan felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Relief because the jar's power was purposeful, meaningful, and ultimately guided by love. Apprehension because he now understood the depth of trust and honesty required to continue this journey. The realization left him stunned, humbled, and deeply moved. He saw Clara in a new light, appreciating the layers of strength and wisdom she had carried all along. And he knew that embracing the jar fully would require everything he had learned, and more. By the end of that evening, the truth had settled in. The jar was a key, not just to hidden memories, but to understanding the hearts and minds of those closest to him. Ethan's journey was far from over. It was only beginning. By the time Ethan reached the final stage of his journey with the jar, he was both physically exhausted and emotionally transformed. The prior exercises had tested him, revealing vulnerabilities and fears he had long ignored, but nothing compared to the weight of the decision now before him. Clara stood beside him, calm and resolute. As she handed him the last instruction, "You can either destroy the jar or embrace it. But know that whatever you choose will change you forever." Ethan held the jar carefully, its glow soft and pulsating in the dim light. He could feel the accumulated energy within it, the echoes of memories, emotions, and truths he had confronted over the past days. The jar had shown him his failures and insecurities, but also his capacity for courage, love, and self-reflection. Destroying it might erase its immediate influence, but it would also close off the potential for growth, for understanding himself and Clara more deeply than he ever had before. He hesitated, recalling the shadowy figure from earlier nights, the tangible manifestation of his fears and doubts. That vision had been terrifying, yet it had forced him to acknowledge truths he could no longer deny. He thought of Clara, who had quietly guided him through this process, her own burdens unspoken but deeply present. He realized that embracing the jar was not just about confronting himself, but about trusting in their bond and allowing her wisdom to guide him. With a deep, steadying breath, Ethan made his choice. He would not destroy the jar. Instead, he placed it carefully on the shelf, near the window where the moonlight would occasionally touch it, letting it remain a silent presence in their home. As he did, a warmth spread through him, a sense of clarity and resolution he had never known. The jar pulsed gently, as if acknowledging his decision, and the faint glow seemed to infuse the room with a calm energy. In the days that followed, Ethan and Clara continued to interact with the jar, not as a tool of fear or manipulation, but as a guide for understanding themselves and each other. Through it, they explored hidden emotions, addressed lingering fears, and shared truths that had long been unspoken. The process strengthened their relationship, fostering a level of intimacy and trust that transcended ordinary experience. Ethan also noticed subtle changes within himself. He felt more confident, more self-aware, and more willing to confront difficult emotions rather than avoid them. The jar had become a mirror of both his strengths and weaknesses, a constant reminder that growth often comes from facing discomfort and embracing vulnerability. He understood that fear was not something to be eliminated, but a signal guiding him toward honesty and courage. By the end of the journey, Ethan realized that the jar was not merely a mysterious artifact or a test. It was a catalyst for transformation. It